What's up, Packer fans? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today is going to be part two of our State of the Packers series. Yesterday, we took a look at the Packers offense position by position, and we will do the same today with the defense. And I'm just going to tell you up front, I am pretty geeked up to go over this because I'm very excited about the state of the Packers defense. I think they have some pieces that they just haven't had in the past. And I think if they can stay healthy and really play as a collective group, which I thought was really a key tenet of the Joe Barry defense a season ago, I think this defense can be really, really, really good in 2022. So let's review who's in and who's out, starting with the new additions to the roster. Jarran Reed, defensive lineman, free agent signing. Devontae Wyatt, first round pick. Quay Walker, first round pick. Kingsley Enagbare, fifth round pick. Keyshawn Nixon comes over from the Raiders. Rico Gafford, sort of an interesting change from wide receiver to corner, but he's an interesting piece on the defense. And then Tariq Carpenter in the seventh round, obviously a bunch of undrafted guys and some street free agents and things like that as well. But those are the key additions. The key subtractions: Ladarius Smith, Whitney Mercilus, Tyler Lancaster, Kingsley Keke, Oren Burks, Chandon Sullivan, Kevin King, Henry Black, and Isaac Yiadom. That seems like a decent amount of subtractions, but a couple things. The two big ones there, clearly, are Ladarius Smith and Whitney Mercilus. But remember, Ladarius Smith played 2 games a season ago, about 30 snaps total, and they lost both of those games. So it's not like Ladarius Smith contributed anything to the Packers winning just a season ago. In addition, Whitney Mercilus was semi-similar. He played in less than a handful of games with a few snaps here and there. He was a really nice rotational piece, but the Packers didn't win or lose anything last year due to Whitney Mercilus. So they're both subtractions. I think you would both, prefer both be on the roster now than not be on the roster, but it's not like they had either of those players a ton a season ago. The rest of the players, your Tyler Lancasters, your Kingsley Kekes, your Oren Burks, your Chandon Sullivans, Kevin Kings, Henry Blacks, Isaac Yiadoms, those have sort of been the players that you've been saying, hey, they're not good enough to be on this defense. You need to find replacements for them. I like some of those guys. I think some of them are better than maybe they got credit for, but those have sort of been a who's who of who have been public enemy number one at different times for Packer fans on the defensive side of the ball. So in their stead, they didn't spend a ton of money on free agents, really only bringing in Jarran Reed and Keyshawn Nixon, but some huge draft capital in Devontae Wyatt and Quay Walker, 2 first-round picks out of the University of Georgia. Side note, that sort of worked out a season ago with Eric Stokes. But then also Kingsley Enagbare, Tariq Carpenter, a couple late-round flyers as well. So I think they added more than they subtracted simply because the players that they subtracted didn't either play a ton a season ago or were not exactly part of the solution over the past handful of seasons. The first thing I want to talk about here is the defensive line, and I could not be more excited about the state of the defensive line. Now, I don't think that this is all of a sudden going to be a defensive line that is world-changing and now the Packers are Super Bowl favorites because of this defensive line, right? But I have been screaming from the rooftops for years to please, please, please get Kenny Clark some legitimate help. And even prior to this offseason, I thought we really saw the defensive line come along a season ago. And a huge part of that was the improvement of Dean Lowry as the season went along. And it just, even though that there were still some Kingsley Kekes and some Tyler Lancasters mixed in, TJ Slayton wasn't quite ready yet. Even though that was the case, I felt like this defensive line really found itself and understood its role within the structure of this defense. And now, not only did you already find that role and that structure within this Joe Barry defense, but to go along with Kenny Clark and Dean Lowry, now you've got Devontae Wyatt, Jarran Reed, an improved TJ Slayton, and you've got a 7th-round flyer in Jonathan Ford. You still got a Jack Heflin. You've got some, Akil Byers, Chris Slayton, Hawate Putautau to potentially compete for roster spots as well. So overall, love the state of this defensive line. If you look at it how I kind of looked at things yesterday, Kenny Clark, clearly your alpha number 1 defensive lineman. Yeah, he can play nose tackle, he can play 3 technique. You can ask him to do just about anything, and he's going to do it at a high level. For years, this defense has gone as Kenny Clark is gone. I think there's still a piece of that exists, but he is going to be that number 1 guy for you. I think if Dean Lowry is... You can debate who's the number 2. We'll see how quickly Devontae Wyatt gets up. But I think Dean Lowry probably starts as your sort of number 2 defensive lineman. I think that's okay. Maybe he's not like a top tier number 2 defensive lineman, but if you've got Kenny as your 1 and good depth behind that, I'm good with Dean being your 2. I think Devonte Wyatt sort of projects as your 3 to start the season. If Jerron Reed is your 4, TJ Slayton's your 5, or even flip those up, you are starting to develop great depth. And then if your 6th is a competition between Jonathan Ford and Jack Heflin, I love that as well. And then you've got probably guys competing for practice squad spots, right? So overall, I think your defensive line rotation is better than it has been in a significant period of time. And I think the thing that I love, for the first time ever, is if Kenny Clark goes down. I've been scared for years if Kenny Clark goes down for any period of time. For the first time ever, if Kenny Clark goes down, I feel like, all right, let's put TJ Slayton at nose tackle. We can put Jerron Reed and Dean Lowry at defensive lineman. You've still got Devonte Wyatt rotating in. You've still got a Jonathan Ford and a Jack Heflin who can be rotational pieces. Like, this isn't ideal. We would really like if Kenny Clark was healthy, but I feel like for the first time that defensive line can get by without Kenny Clark for a handful of games and actually be okay. More importantly, maybe for the first time since Kenny Clark has been here, you feel like he doesn't have to play 80% of the snaps and you can still be okay, which means hopefully you can play him closer to like 60 to 70% of the snaps. He can stay fresher as the game goes along, and more importantly, fresher as the season goes along. I think that goes for all of these guys. I don't think Dean Lowry and Jerron Reed and TJ Slayton and any of these guys need to play a ton of snaps because you have great depth at this position. The other thing I really like is you have different types of pieces, right? Dean Lowry, Kenny Clark, Devonte Wyatt, Jerron Reed, TJ Slayton, they all bring something different to the table. And then that last spot, that Jonathan Ford, Jack Heflin spot, both of those guys are going to be competing for sort of your Tyler Lancaster role. I'm not going to bring a lot to the table as a pass rusher, but I could be a big, huge, you're going to have trouble moving me defensive lineman, and I can play a role like that for 10, 12 snaps per game and have value, even as your 6th defensive lineman. So I really like how Brian Gutekunst has put this defensive line together. I really hope they don't do anything with Dean Lowry, because I would love to see this group as a collective getting a lot of time. If you look at the rest of this defense, and we'll get to more on this in just a moment, right? We're going to see a lot of Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith on the edges. We're going to see a lot of Devondre Campbell and Quay Walker at inside linebacker. We are going to see primarily, almost entirely, Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander, and Eric Stokes at corner. We're going to see almost entirely Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage at safety. The rest of the defense, in my opinion, is going to be very minimal rotating. You're going to see some players rotate in at the edge. Clearly, those guys aren't going to play 100% snaps. You will see a 6th defensive back come in, whether it's a Sean Davis or a Keyshawn Nixon at times. But for the most part, maybe even a Chris Barnes here and there as maybe a rundown defender. There's going to be some of that. But for the most part, edge, inside linebacker, corner, safety is going to have almost no rotations. Defensive line has the ability to be that one spot where we're going to get guys in, keep them fresh, and keep everything good up front, and then that's still going to benefit everyone else behind them. So love the state of this defensive line, and clearly, yes, I believe this defensive line is good enough to win a Super Bowl. Let's go to edge, which is a sneaky, interesting position. Now, to start things off, more than okay with your starters being Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith, right? That is a good edge rusher tandem. I don't know that it can be like one of the best in the league, but nobody's complaining about a Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith edge duo to sort of be your guys on the edge rusher position. That is a good group, and I'm excited about that. The next group, however, is all question marks. What does Randy Ramsey bring to the table? Is he just a special teams guy? Can he add anything more? Jonathan Garvin has shown nothing. Tipa's still undersized, and yes, he showed some okay flashes at the end of the season, but mostly he got washed out of play. Like, not washed out of plays, but he's not bringing anything more to the table than just being a end of the line rotational edge rusher, right? Ladarius Hamilton, I'm semi-intrigued by, but then you got Chauncey Manac, you got Kobe Jones. Kingsley Enagbare is a 5th round pick. Like, what's he going to bring to the table this upcoming season? You have a ton of question marks there and no real legitimate answers. And I think that's mostly okay. You're hoping that at least one of those guys, if you get Enagbare or Ramsey or Garvin or Tipa, Ladarius Hamilton, if just one of those guys steps up to be a real solid rotational player, you feel good having 3 guys then. But if none of them do, and it was like last year where you had Preston and Gary good, and then their 2 replacements came in, and it's like, this is not good, this is not great. Like, you have major issues because you can't get to the quarterback, and setting the edge is a problem. So that is a concern of mine. The other thing is we are just a year removed from Preston Smith having a very bad season in 2020. What happens if Preston Smith has a really bad season in 2022? And while I think Rashawn Gary is on the path to stardom, let's not forget that there were times during last season, more towards the beginning of last season, he really progressed as the season went along, but there were times where Rashawn Gary would disappear for stretches, and you didn't see him making impact plays. Now, as mentioned, as the season went along, you saw less and less of that, and he became much more of a dominant player. I think Gary's going to be great almost no matter what. But if Preston all of a sudden has a down year and none of these other players step up, this position is a little bit more of a question mark for me than I think a lot of other people or just other people are talking about. So I'm okay with it. I think they have enough to win a Super Bowl. I don't think you need like a tremendous amount of depth. I think Quay Walker could be used in some capacity as a situational edge rusher. I think you could even go some 4 defensive linemen, meaning you could go almost like a Dean Lowry and a Devontae Wyatt on the edges, with like a Jerron Reed and a Kenny Clark on the inside, and use more 2 off-ball linebackers. I think Green Bay has some different options that they can use in different scenarios that it makes me okay overall with this position, but I'm a little less bullish on edge than I think some others might be. Overall, I'm going to check the box. Yes, they can win a Super Bowl with this group. And I think they have 2 legitimate, two legitimate starting edge rushers, of course, in Gary and Preston. Just everything after that becomes a bit more of a question mark. All right, let's move to inside linebacker. Another position that, who would have thought just a couple years ago that this inside linebacker position could be a legitimate strength of this team and one of the better inside linebacker groups in football. I am extremely bullish on Quay Walker, and I think he's going to come in and have an immediate impact on this defense. I wholeheartedly believe Devondre Campbell is going to play the exact same way that he did a season ago and continue to play at a very high level. I love Chris Barnes as your number 3 linebacker. As I mentioned before, I think he's going to push Quay Walker for every snap. I think he's going to, kick and scream and battle for everything he can possibly get, whether that's an early down linebacker, whether that's special teams, whatever. But he has called plays. He has been a starter. That is an ideal number 3 inside linebacker. And then everyone else from Ray Wilborn to Ty Summers to Isaiah McDuffie, Calif Bryce, Ellis Brooks is just fighting for those 4th and 5th, sort of special teams spots. And that's exactly what you want. In fact, you can probably, just talk to Rich Bisaccia and say, all right, out of Wilborn, Summers, McDuffie, Bryce, Brooks, keep your favorite 2 that are going to be the best 2 on special teams, because you're hoping that Devondre is going to be your alpha. Quay can fill in anything else. Chris Barnes can still fill in. Like, you're hoping that it doesn't have to get to any of those other guys as your, starting linebacker that are going to play a ton of snaps, right? So the rest can compete for special teams in that number 4 linebacker spot, but this should be primarily Campbell and Quay and Barnes. I love that grouping. I think they're going to be incredibly successful and arguably the best inside linebacker group that the Packers have had since probably, and I think it could be better than this, but the Nick Barnett, Brandon Schiller, Desmond Bishop, AJ Hawk group, which was very deep and had some talent on it, to say the least. But I think this group can rival that in upper end talent. All right, cornerback. The same sort of story here, right? Love the starters. Jair Stokes-Douglas, one of the best corner groups, if not the best corner group in football. The best starting group probably on this Packers team. Love what those 3 can bring to the table. I think they can be really, really great against any wide receiver core that any other team wants to put on the field. I think they can mix and match in a variety of different ways. And just spoiler, yes, I think this group can absolutely win a Super Bowl. But once again, we have some depth questions, right? I believe that Keyshawn Nixon could develop into a slot/number 4 corner. I'm not putting that in, Sharpie until we see him in training camp and preseason and some actual games. But I think there's a world where he can develop into that. I think Shamar Jean-Charles is going to get a spot, but he has yet to show anything either last year or in mini camps this year that shows that he's ready to take a step. We'll see what training camp brings though, and what preseason brings. Hopefully he is. Rico Gafford is definitely an intriguing player that I think has a leg up on some of the special teams battles, also has some versatility. I'm very intrigued what he could bring to the table, and I'm not, if he was your number 6 corner, I'm okay with that. Same with KB Nento, same with even a Keandre Thomas, who made some flash plays in mini camps as well. So I think you've got number 6. I think you've got 1, 2, and 3. I think the big questions are at that 4 and 5 spot, that Keyshawn Nixon, Shamar Jean-Charles, or does anyone else grab any of those spots? That's the concern, but you're so good 1 through 3, and you've got some developmental players 6th and beyond, that overall this position is great. It's just who can be that 4, who can be that 5, and does anyone take those spots and grab the bull by the horn. So we will have to kind of keep an eye on those positions. But yes, clearly believe that this position group can win a Super Bowl. And then that brings us to safety. Very similar to edge, very similar to corner. You feel really good about the starting group of Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage. But then the question becomes depth. I'm very intrigued by Sean Davis. I really can't wait to see what he does in training camp and exhibition season. I think he has a legitimate chance to be a real solid number 3, but only time is going to tell. Vernon Scott, Tariq Carpenter probably compete for one other spot. Special teams and what they can do as a box linebacker / safety could really alter who ultimately gets that spot. Ennis Gaines is still, to me, a intriguing developmental practice squad type guy. And then they have a flyer guy in Trey Sterling as an undrafted free agent. The big question here for me is Darnell Savage. Just how good can he be? Can he get back to 2020 where he had a really good season? Or is he more 2021 where he had a really tough season? I think there's so much upside there. I still believe that Darnell Savage can be as good as he wants to be at safety. I don't think this is a situation where he's just a bad player and that's what he's going to be. We've seen the peaks. We've seen the valleys. I would just love for some consistency out of Darnell Savage. My only other concern here is can this group be any good if Adrian Amos goes out for any period of time? You feel okay with Savage, but then can Sean Davis and Darnell Savage be a good enough group at safety? Can, Vernon Scott or Tariq Carpenter and Darnell Savage be good enough at safety? I think if you had to get by for a handful of games with Savage and Davis, I think that you could, but I think Amos would be a huge loss if anything ever happened to him. And I do question some of the depth. I do question whether or not Darnell Savage can be, can he be that 2020 Savage and not have the struggles that he had a season ago? I think there's legitimate question marks, but I would check the box again that I think if everyone stays healthy, they have enough to win a Super Bowl at this spot as well. So defensive line, edge, linebacker, corner, safety, I think all of them are Super Bowl ready. I think all of them can be good enough. I don't think there's anything that you would look on at this defense other than the depth behind edge, corner, and safety that would say, all right, I'm super scared. I don't think they have the pieces. Brian Gutekunst has built a team. We've now gone through offense and defense, right? The only position that I can say I have legitimate questions. We didn't cover special teams, but special teams is a legitimate question. The only other position is that number 1 wide receiver, right? I feel good about everything else. There's some depth pieces that you question about. There's questions about David Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins and some of their health. And I think that the health of overall of this team is going to be a major story this year because I just don't feel like this team has maybe the depth that it has in the past. But man, your starting caliber players, your top 25 to 30 on this team are really freaking good. And as I mentioned, outside of that number 1 playmaker, I think it has everything else that you want. And I do think that number 1 playmaker is something that you can get around with overall weapons at running back, wide receiver, tight end, an MVP quarterback, a good O-line, a great defense, and hopefully an improved special teams, a really smart head coach. This team has the pieces that it needs to win the Super Bowl. It needs to stay healthy. It needs some players to step up. It needs almost everyone that's in those top 25 to not have like a Preston Smith 2020 season, right? Where he just doesn't look anything like himself. So this team needs to play up to its peak. But man, if it does, they're as good as any team and they should very much be in the Super Bowl, conversation as a team that is competing for a Super Bowl in 2022. Appreciate you joining me for this series. I will be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode, so make sure to check it out. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.